All right, let's explore another tool for UV mapping or unwrapping. And what we're going to now make our way down to is the UV peeler tool. Now, what this tool is useful for is it's useful for things like tracks. So like, let's just say I was, for example, going to, um, let's just click on the model tab here, or even make a polygon. And let's just say I make something like this. And now let's pretend that this is going to be a track, like a racing track, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend it like that, bend it from here, like that. Well, how do you UV this? Well, there's a few ways. One, again, I could just use the UV project tool and use planar. Or actually, I just used the wrong thing because I was trying to UV this. But let's just say I take this object, I'm going to cut it, I'm going to create a new item, and I'm going to paste this object onto its own, right? Well, let's just say there's a few ways that I could UV this. One, again, planar along the Y. So again, Y, I'm going to pick that, and and here I go. Well, now if I apply the material to this object here, I get an okay result. And if I just scale this down so that it's more proportional across the entire model, and of course, I have to rotate this to get a better reading from left to right, and this is okay. Well, what if I wanted to paint across this track and I wanted to make sure that the center is always the center? And like I wanted to paint some stripes, like racing stripes, or just track regular stripes along the track. Maybe it's a two-lane road, or four lane, or whatever. Well, then this isn't really good, because what I'm going to have to make sure is that my texture is actually going to have to divide this in half, and I'm going to have to very carefully paint a curved line across this track. Well, how about if I wanted to UV this in a straight manner? So, I mean, considering if I had this track, and if it was any more complex than this is, so let me make this track slightly more complex by doing something like this, and all I'm really doing is just using the modeling tools, and smooth is okay. And now what if I was going to, again, project this and, and get whatever result? Well, again, the more complex this track is, the more I'm going to have to be careful across the entire track and make sure I paint everything perfectly in 2D. But what if I don't want to do that? What if I just want to make sure that my track is perfectly straight? So in Photoshop, I only paint one straight line, and I keep things very simple as far as the track is concerned. Well, I could do that using the UV peeler tool. The way it works is, and I'm going to remove my map off this object for now. The way it works is, what I have to do is I just have to select one edge, and this edge will, well, basically, let's just do it. Anyways, I'm going to select this edge here. I'm going to use the UV peeler, and it automatically peels this thing for me. So now when I select UV test, the result is not too hot. That's because, my result has been sort of squashed. It's using my, the entirety of my map. But in reality, this object is really long. So I have a major squish in here. Not cool. So what I have to do is I have to, of course, stretch this considerably and keep stretching. And, this is not the exact result I was expecting yet, but what I can do is I can flatten all these lines out so that they're perfectly straight. One simple way of doing that is, of course, what I usually end up doing right after a peel operation, I end up just selecting one or two of these lines, just right-clicking right across them, holding Alt-L. I mean, that's what I use for, I don't know if that's the default hotkey, but what I want to do is I want to select an edge ring, so select ring. And once you select that, what you can do is you can go to your action center. You can just choose local, and you actually don't want local. What you want is center local. Axis auto. And now when you do this, you can straighten these lines out like this. Now, when you're using the interactive tools here, you're going to go past the negative. You usually don't want that, so if you click on negative, if you turn it off, it will automatically snap to this. So now, what you have here, and if I, once again, scale this a little bit more, you have nice square lines all across the entire track, regardless of how you go, for the most part. Now, it's not perfect. It does kind of break apart somewhere here. Of course, if you subdivide the model, you get a much better representation, or a much better result. And all the way across the model, you start noticing that this track is in fact curved. Like here, you start noticing that it's all nice and curved. This line just keeps going right across. So if I now scale this down, you notice that we have one nice line right across this track. So this is very, very useful for, the UV peeler is very useful for that kind of stuff. So let's go back to our, torus here. Well, that can be applied to this object as well. If I just select this profile and I want to sweep right along it, or UV peel right along it, I can. Now, sometimes what you're going to get is you're going to get an odd result like this. That's fine. Just select the next one up, UV peel, and you're not always going to get a perfect result. Sometimes it'll fail. Sometimes you'll get something like this. If you have no overlapping polygons, that's a good sign. So what do? You just, again, select a few of these, select loop, select ring, scale, make sure, again, that your center is local, axis is auto. Usually, for the most part, you don't even have to choose axis auto. It'll just automatically be on that. So often you'll just go, you'll go between this automatic and then just center local. You can hotkey it however you want. And then just, once again, go to this. And I have no idea why this one's not playing up, but I should be able to just select that edge individually. And something's up with that one. Not cool. Oh well. Of course, what I am able to do is I'm able to use one of these buttons here. What it does is, if you get any weird results where one of your vertices has been moved like that. Oh, I think I know what happened. I had my smooth on and it was just giving me weird results. Anyways, if I have something like this, what I'm able to do, of course, is I can always just make my selection. I can use these snap functions here, or align, and what it will do is it will snap all these vertices along this line to the furthest point in this direction. So the furthest point in this direction is, of course, these points right here. So if I press this now, you'll notice that it snaps to this line right here. Now, of course, if I had something like this, and I had the same selection, if I press this now, it's going to snap to that furthest point in that direction. So anyways, that works for this object as well. More or less. It's not perfect, but it's a very quick way of generating UVs. And again, when I smooth, I get an okay result. When I press the plus button on my keyboard to refine my subdivisions, again, the result is okay. Again, you might have to flip this and whatnot, but again, it's a really quick way of mapping these kind of objects out. Now, what happens is when you get a long track, sometimes, what you might have to do, especially, to use up more UV space. So let's just say I pack this, and I have a lot more of this. So let's just say if this object was a lot longer, what I might have to do is I might have to, of course, select half my object, press move, tear off, and and handle things this way. Because what if my object was like this, and it was really long, and the only way I could get rectangular shapes in my UVs is to do this. Well, what happens if I pack this? I'm not really using a lot of room on my texture map. Now I'm going to go over this a little bit later in another object, but what you really want to do is you want to be using as much as possible of your texture map, because you're loading up a texture map into RAM, into memory, and of course you're only using this small portion, so this is not good. So what do? Well, you can always break up that piece, and now if I pack, I'm all of a sudden using a larger portion of my texture now. So if I again do this, split it up, maybe this, split it up, and now I go pack, again I'm using more of my texture map, which is good. Granted, the result here is not so good, but all I really have to do is I just have to scale things up, and I'll be good. And as you can see, I'm starting to get more square results. But anyways, yeah, what you're really trying to get is, anyways, that's just an example of how the UV peeler works. Of course, the next example is something like this. Again, this is the exact tool you want for this job. What you want to do is you want to select this, like that, and you want to use the UV peeler. Again, sometimes it breaks, sometimes it doesn't. Now in this case it's kind of finicky because this is open, or it's a closed object, so sometimes what you might need to do is you might need to remove the caps, paste them somewhere else, and again select this, peel, and again sometimes your result is just not very good. That doesn't always happen, and I'm actually going to choose automatic. That might be why it's causing the results that I'm getting. So yeah, I'm not really sure why I'm getting these bad results right now. But anyways, here we go. So this is okay. And now again, what I have to do is I just have to straighten all this out. If I just apply a material to this, not cool, not what I'm expecting. I hit edge loop. I make sure that I am in, again, local. I straighten all this stuff out. Smooth. And scale. And sometimes if honestly, if you're not seeing the results that you're expecting, don't be afraid to scale the UVs generally in the upward, beyond your UV map. Because what you're really trying to do at this point is just make sure you troubleshoot your UV map and that all your squares are actually square. This is all you're trying to do. When you fit this into your texture map by going pack and actually fitting it in, you now know for sure that these are perfectly square. It's hard to tell when they're really this big. What if this object was a lot longer? So like, let's just say I go ahead and clone this, right? And I do something like this, where I bridge it in the middle. And now I do the same thing where I use the UV peeler again, right? And then I select ring and then select edge loop. I make sure that my action center is once again local. I straighten all this stuff out. So I'm going to go to negative again, snap it all in. It's really hard to tell right now if all these things are square, regardless of how much I scale this down, I can't really tell. So what I have to do sometimes is, once again, go beyond my UV mapping space that I'm going to be using for my texture map, and I noticed that this is in fact not bad. It's more or less square. I might have to flip it, however, because it's not really readable from left to right. It is in fact backwards, so I'm just going to have to flip it, and I'm going to need my negative to be enabled. I'm just going to keep scaling until I get more or less, a readable result. And now I'm able to pack it in like that. Now again, if the track starts getting way too long and you want to cover more space of the texture map, well, that's fairly simple. Just select half of it, move it out, make sure again that your tear off is on, go to pack again, and now you're using a larger portion of the texture map. Now obviously, you're not only going to get objects that have just one single track. If you do get these kind of objects, sometimes you might just need to move over more portions and then do this, where now you're using a much larger part of the texture map, and these squares are starting to shrink, which basically means that now that they're covering more space, you have more texture room and more texture data to apply to the model. So now you can add more detail to the model, versus if you're using a small portion of the UV map, then you're not really being efficient and you have to work within only a few pixels in there, versus now you have almost the entirety of the map. So that pretty much covers almost every single mapping method. The next one, I'm actually just going to go back to my where's my cube? So I'm going to go back to my cube and I'm going to explore the Unwrap button. Now the Unwrap button, really what it is it's a more sophisticated way of unwrapping. The algorithm is a lot more involved than, for example, the planar one. Now you can, in fact, use UV projection tool. You can use planar, you can use atlas, or cylindrical or spherical for the cube, because it is a more or less simple object. But sometimes you want to get that initial result, when you're creating your cube initially, how the entire object is already unwrapped. You can faintly see this, map here. Sometimes you just want to get that kind of result, this specifically. And let me just delete that quickly. Well, how do I get there from here? From an object that has no UVs? Well, what I can do is I can just use Unwrap. Now, the way Unwrap works is that I have to, well, it works a few ways. One, I can select a few polygons, hit Unwrap, and it will automatically unwrap those polygons. Again, nice thing is I can read from left to right, or from, in this case, from bottom to top, because these polygons are connected. This is very nice. Well, what if I want to handle the entire object in one go? Well, then I have to treat this slightly differently. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to think about how this object would be cut. Think of almost like, clothes. The seams on clothes and how they would be, the panels, how they would be cut and how they would be placed on a table. It's really no different than that. So I'm just going to select a few edges here, like this, and I'm going to unwrap this and see what I get. And I get something like that, which is good. The only thing I have to do is align it. Like that. Again, readable. I just have to flip it, perhaps on the wrong axis, sometimes on both. And it is readable. It's all good. Again, nice thing is, of course, I get a lot of connected polygons. I might have to rotate it slightly this way. Sometimes I might have to hold Control and, rotate here just to get a much more accurate rotation, like that. And for the most part, this is good. Now, how did I come up with this? Well, if I was to, for example, just choose all these edges here, then what this really does is it cuts this object along here. So this polygon in here has been cut all the way around. Therefore, now if I use Unwrap, you will notice that those two polygons that were cut all the way around are separate. they're nicely unwrapped, right? It's all good. But this part is now messy. Well, the reason why it's messy is because it doesn't have a place to cut. This object needs to be cut somewhere in order for it to be unwrapped. So what I would need to do is, if I again did that, I would need to specify one place to cut. So now I can take this and I can go all the way around, almost in a cylindrical fashion, and cut along here. So I'm going to try that again. And now I get 2 polygons and this all the way around. Not bad. But what if I want to make sure that these automatically connect to this? Well, you could easily do this like I did previously, but I want to make sure that one of these edges is unselected. So I'm just going to deselect this. And these edges will now be connected to this because I'm not cutting those edges. So I'm just going to unwrap and I automatically get something like this. So again, all I want to do now is just rotate and I'm pretty good to go. Now this tool is what I'm going to be using on the I-beam, which will be coming up next. It is a slightly more involved tool, but yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going to be using for that. So anyways, next video up soon.